Like most families, mine had traditions. And I'm not talking about Christmas or Easter or whatever. I'm talking about Tuesday nights, we go and get pizza and watch some good old-fashioned American wrestling. Another tradition we had was going to the local Blockbuster on the weekends to find movies and video games to rent. It was actually at one of these now last known evidences that the 90s ever existed that I was introduced to 3 video game series that would come to define my identity as a gamer. Fallout 3, Grand Theft Auto 4, and what was at the time the most recent entry into the topic of today's video, Hitman Blood Money. For those of you who are not familiar with the Hitman series, it's an open-world stealth franchise wherein you play the role of Agent 47, a genetically manufactured clone designed to be the ultimate assassin, working for a secret organization of contract killers known as the International Contract Agency, or ICA. Each game has you going from level to level, dropping 47 into different locations tasked with killing different targets in whatever manner you see fit. You can go in loud and proud, killing anything that moves, or you can complete the entire mission without swapping outfits or killing anyone besides the target. Or blow them up with a golf ball while dressed as a clown. The game series is basically just a fancy open-world puzzle game, where players can set up traps, interactions, and basically take out their targets in whatever manner they see fit, or let the world itself kill them for you. All in all, it's just good old power fantasy fun. With the recent launch of Hitman World of Assassination, which is basically just the last 3 modern Hitman games bundled into one with a new roguelike game mode, I've fallen back into it, and I've been revisiting the modern series as a whole. It's been great. After working on videos like the one where I talked about Fallout 76's Enclave group trying to mass report players for not playing nice, or talking about how racist and powerfully angry HBO's Velma show is, and continues to be, it got me thinking, has there ever been a controversy around the Hitman series? Fans of the franchise, like myself, will know that, yes, there have been a few dust-ups around the series, mostly related to 2012's Hitman Absolution, wherein the game developers were just straight-up ghosting David Bateson, the man who has provided both the voice and the face of Agent 47 in every single Hitman game, as well as the game having a drastically exaggerated tone compared to the more down-to-earth earlier entries. I wasn't buying it though. I was 1000% sure that if I went digging, I could find some real controversy. Something that would really get Twitter talking. Something that would prove once and for all that Hitman was, I don't know, people were mad about Jaden Animation for saying something about Jesus so anti-Christian, I guess, and that we should feel bad about playing it. Tragically, for both myself for having read it, and for you as the audience for having made the ultimate mistake of clicking on this video, I fucked around, and I found out. To add a little bit of context, the thread that I found was dated for 2018, right before the second entry into the rebooted series was set to drop. And as far as I could tell, this was the only instance of this kind of, we'll talk about that later. But it was the only one that I can find, so we can at least take solace in that. I'm also not going to be revealing any identities or socials because, duh. The post is ancient history at this point, and the thread is long since dead. So don't go trying to search it out or anything. Just leave it be. The post that started this madness began with a content warning that covers discussions of violence, as is to be expected in a game where, you unsubscribe people from life.
With Hitman 2 coming up, and how public perspective about the game seems to shifted from the disdain of Absolution to near universal adoration of the rebooted Hitman from a year or so ago, I think it's important to look back at these games and think about them critically.
I will say that I find it odd how the inspiration for this kind of reflection came from one game being bad and then the next game being good. Like, it's a bad thing if the series was revisited and improved compared to the last one? Maybe I'm reading this wrong, but it still feels like an odd start.
First off, I have to say that I love the Hitman games. I absolutely love crime fiction, and have enjoyed it ever since I was a teenager. The idea of a game series that allowed me to live out that assassin fantasy, while perhaps disturbing to think about now, was very appealing to me. I have played and beat every Hitman game in the franchise. And I feel like the main focus of the criticism of these games seems to be the recent Absolution. I remember the talk around the overly violent CGI cutscene where Agent 47 takes apart an elite squad of killer nuns. The discussion of sexism and violence towards women was an appropriate one, and I found it refreshing to see Hitman get some well-needed criticism.
One thing I will give the poster credit for is that he is spot on with his criticism of Hitman Absolution. The level of gratuitous sexuality, specifically around a group of ICA-employed assassins called the Saints, women dressed in tight leather bodysuits made to resemble a nun's habit. The game felt more like Metal Gear Solid than any other Hitman game, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the Saints specifically kind of felt a little bit over the top.
But for me, I have always wondered why the imagery of Agent 47 himself hasn't given anyone pause. It's really blatant when you think about it. Here, this is what he looks like.
If you don't already see where this is going, I envy you. Cherish the brain cells you have left, because they're about to burn away like an ant under a magnifying glass.
Okay, so who is Agent 47? Well, he's a genetically engineered clone who is completely bald, has blue eyes, has pale white skin tone, wears a color palette of red, black, and white, and travels to exotic, mostly foreign locales to assassinate people for an organization that is heavily implied at the end of Blood Money to be working within a branch of English intelligence services.
Here it comes.
Agent 47 is a Nazi's wet dream.
He said it.
His color palette is the color of the Nazi flag.
He said what we've all been thinking.
His physical features are of a perfect Aryan specimen.
I mean, it's what's staring us in the face this whole time.
He's genetically engineered eugenics to be the perfect killer.
That might not be what eugenics is.
He works for money, but the organization you take all of your contracts from is in the hands of a famous imperialistic empire. Diana reports directly to Your Majesty at the end of the game, meaning that the ICA circumvents Parliament and reports directly to the Queen. You are basically playing a Nazi skin-headed super spy assassin, and no one has spoken about this in the 18 years since the first game's release. I find that a bit troubling.
My brother and Adam, the reason no one has spoken about this in 18 years since the first game's release is that everything you said is complete nonsense. My guy's really out here saying that because 47 wears a suit with a red tie that he's a Nazi dog whistle. Like, bro, what? So let's go back and break down some of the claims that he's made. 1. 47's color palette is the same as the Nazi flag, thus making him a Nazi. Sometimes colors are just colors, you know? His physical features are of a perfect Aryan specimen, words that have never been used to describe 47 in any game for very obvious reasons. Genetic engineering and eugenics are similar-ish, but eugenics is for passing down specific physical traits like eye color or skin color. But 47 doesn't have sex. He kills people and goes to church on Sundays. Canonically, it is implied that 47 works for the British Secret Service, the spy agency of, quote, a famous imperialistic empire. This one actually threw me for a bit of a loop because their evidence is specifically focused on one scene at the end of Hitman Blood Money, where Diana Burnwood, 47's handler, makes a phone call to someone and refers to them as Your Majesty. The only problem with this is that the office that Diana is standing in this cutscene is overlooking the Copenhagen harbor, as in Copenhagen, Denmark, which, for those who might not know, has a monarchy. Granted, this of course does not mean that Diana was intrinsically speaking with a member of the Danish monarchy, but, you know, it's just as likely as not, especially given the contextual locational clues. The ICA, the organization that 47 and Diana both work for, is an international assassination business that works with governmenting bodies like the FBI, MI6, and CSIS. So it's not exactly a huge stretch of the imagination that such a well-connected organization would or could be in contact with high-ranking members of world governments, old world nobility, and wealthy elites. Also, you know, they kill people for money. Pretty sure the ICA doesn't really care about parliamentary procedures.
I think part of the reason why this is the case is because modern Hitman is sort of a joke. IO Interactive have wisely taken the route of making the Hitman series more James Bond than Leon, the professional. And in doing that, a more socially aware modern audience hasn't really thought about the Hitman series in a lens more critical of its visual messaging.
Reflecting on Hitman Absolution as it compares to the rebooted Hitman series, I have no idea how you think the series has gotten more James Bonds-like. Absolution went way more cartoonish and way heavier on the action genre than any other Hitman game. Like, the time 47 had to dress up like a luchador in order to infiltrate an underground wrestling match and fist fight an 8-foot-tall, bulked-up wrestler and kill him while in the ring. So again, I don't know what you're talking about when you say that. If anything, it's, the opposite.
You're encouraged to wear silly costumes, kill targets in goofy, interesting ways, and play around with the environment to see what makes it click. It comes off more like a puzzle game than an assassin fantasy.
Because it is. If you want to play Ghost Recon, play Ghost Recon.
Agent 47 can play drums really well. He knows a ton of yoga poses. He knows how to walk a catwalk. He's been supposedly trained in a number of needless activities that allows himself to be planted into any environment need be, and that in turn makes him a sort of Buster Keaton stone-faced joke within the game world.
Can you imagine being the guy who created Agent 47? Billions of dollars in black market research, unethical genetic testing that would put the creators of Spore to shame, and the end result is a guy perfectly trained to be the ultimate assassin, but he knows how to play the drums, walk, and remembers yoga poses. Damn, that's a huge L. They then go on to show the tutorial level of Hitman Blood Money, which involves 47 killing some gangsters in an abandoned fair, as well as the fair's owner, whose negligence resulted in several parkgoers dying when the Ferris wheel collapsed, and claims that it shows the game at its most troubling. Honestly, up to this point, I could follow the logic on his other arguments, even with how stupid they are. But with this one, I honestly don't have any idea what he's talking about.
A lot of people spoke about how Hitman of 2016 basically gave every character in the game an American accent, even with characters who lived in Morocco and Japan. But what's the alternative? This? A white supremacist metaphor murdering badly accented foreigners?
This is, ironically, the part that I agree with the most, but I think it shows a bit of deflection on the part of the person who made this post. One of the weirdest things that stood out to me in the 2016 Hitman game was how everyone had either an American or a British accent, even, as this person claims, people's native to locations like Japan and Morocco. That's valid, definitely. That was a silly decision on behalf of IO. Shame on you. The problem I have, though, is the way he describes using actors native to the game's in-world locations, describing them as badly accented foreigners. To me, this kind of makes it seem like the only options would have been to use people with American accents or people with stereotypically racist accents. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but even ignoring your white supremacist metaphor argument, it still would have been better to have characters voiced by people with accents native to the game's real-world locations instead of, white people. Ironic, given the context.
I think it's important to reflect on the legacy of the series in a way lets us both acknowledge its very troubling past, as well as encouraging it to look at the more modern entries with those thoughts on the past games. Hitman 2 looks like it's going to be a fantastic game, but I am worried with levels set in places like India and Mexico, we're going to see the weird racial side of this franchise show itself again.
They talk about Hitman's very troubling past, but primarily focus on one entry in the franchise as being problematic, and then using that as the basis to paint the other two games as being problematic based on dude's tie red, Nazi. That was pretty much the end of the post. There's a bunch of responses and comments that they go many directions, but thankfully a lot of them are calling out the inconsistencies and ridiculousness of some of the original posters' arguments. But I think that the main post gave me enough brain rot for one day. I do honestly think that sometimes in entertainment we do include things that are problematic without knowing it, but it's up to us as the viewers to be able to determine whether or not what we are actually seeing is the intention of the creator. Is Agent 47 a Nazi dog whistle because he wears a black and white suit with a red tie? Or is he just a product of a 20-year-old video game series about a bald guy who dresses nice and kills people? You know my thoughts, so now I'm interested to hear yours. Until next time, though, I thank you so much for watching, like and subscribe and stuff, and I will see you all out there in the wasteland.